Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast where innovation isn't just an ideal, it's a way of life. I'm your host and creator of the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die newsletter, Danny Nathan. Hello, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. This week, I have Kate Kalsovich with me. Kate, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be a part of this.
I'm excited to chat and to learn all that we can from you. So without further ado, Kate, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and just sort of how you got started in the world of innovation.
Yeah, for sure. So my background is actually in computer programming. That's what I went to school for. So I've always had a very technology focus. And I spent most of my career actually doing website design and development. Innovation, roughly the last, I'd say, 3 years. So it is kind of new for me. It's when I joined a company called Fable, and I first joined Fable to lead their professional services. And then we realized that much of the work that I was doing for professional services was really just experimentation and learning and things that could help drive the business forward. So my professional services role evolved into an innovation leadership role. And then I would say my experience as somebody who lives with a disability, so I wear hearing aids in both of my ears, also kind of leads me to be an innovator because there's a lot of stuff you just got to figure out in the world when you have a disability. So I've always had that innovation, figure it out, get things done kind of a mindset, which really served me well in an innovation role.
Talk to me a little bit about how the sort of transition into an innovation role happened. Is it something that you pushed for, or did somebody within the organization sort of look over one day and go, oh my God, Kate, you're doing innovation. You should do innovation now. Like, how did that unfold?
Yeah, it's kind of the latter.
Funny.
It did happen somewhat naturally because the primary purpose of Fable is we're a platform and it's about connecting companies to people with disabilities so that they can learn how to develop better products. And on the professional services side of things, we were sometimes using the platform, but using it in very different ways than our customers were using it. So we were always exploring new things and new ways of helping to solve some of the difficult problems that our customers have. And just the difficult problem with accessibility in the world at large, especially online. Of course, that's our primary focus. So it's it was actually one of our co-founders who really thought innovation was the right title for me and for my team. And so we did that evolution just over a little over 2 years or so now, where we just rebranded, we created an innovation strategy, like a 2-year strategy. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's been going strong ever since.
Nice. All right. Kate, my understanding of Fable, and forgive me, it's not a company that I was particularly familiar with before you and I met and discussed it, but in my head, Fable was focused on providing a service to help companies create more accessible websites, web applications, things like that. But from the description that you've just offered, it sounds like part of the work was also in helping companies think about how to add accessibility and accessible products to their portfolio. Am I understanding that correctly?
I mean, yes, definitely. So there is an innovation angle too, where so companies can do a number of things with Fable. Our core offering is our community of people with disabilities and the ability to connect with them and to do that on demand online. So you can use that to do accessibility testing. You can use it for usability testing, and you can use it for generative idea creation too. So we do see
Got it.
some of our customers trying to really understand the needs of people with disabilities as consumers and then develop their products and services based on what they've learned.
Interesting. Okay, so you sit somewhere between sort of a consulting company and a services company then. Consulting in terms of ideation and helping people sort of understand the world that you live in versus services being, a colorblind person can't read this on your website, for example.
I'd say we're less close to consulting and services because we're more self-serve. We want these companies working directly with our community and not having that middle layer. And I know I said I led professional services, which is one of the things we do.
Sure.
But the vast majority of our customers are just using our platform and doing their own user research, doing their own, insights collection. with
Got
every
it.
layer of services. So some of them are using services, but most of them are just interacting directly with our community.
Got it. Okay. And so the product then that you all offer is really the community of people with some sort of disability and the access to them, uh perhaps not entirely unlike a dating service, but for somebody who is looking for help with accessibility issues and understanding that world.
Yeah, I sometimes describe it as being like Uber. So when you need a ride somewhere, you call and the nearest Uber driver picks you up. In this case, you need some accessibility insights, and you use Fable to call a person with a disability, and they hop on a call and look at your website or your application and give you feedback.
Got it. Okay. That's a really interesting model, and I definitely did not understand it quite correctly the first time we chatted, so I appreciate the elaboration and the clarity there. I want to circle back, Kate, to something you said a moment ago. You said that you spent a while getting sort of an innovation strategy in place and planning out with like a 2-year future view. Talk to me a little bit about what that strategic endeavor looked like and what types of things you were trying to memorialize for the future and what changed in the process.
Yeah, great question there. So for us, having a strategy was really about deciding where to focus and where do we want to put our efforts when it comes to innovation. So memorialize for the future. It's an interesting choice of words. I think it's not so much about it's about trying to anticipate the future and being ahead of the curve. So one of the things Fable tries to do is we're trying to really be leaders in this accessibility space. And so I know you said you're not very familiar with Fable. Companies that have to do accessibility and want to
Mhm.
do accessibility are pretty familiar with Fable. So we're known within the industry that we operate in
Got it.
fairly well because we are one of the only companies that has this community of testers available on demand. So it's really about thinking of like what's going to drive the business forward and what's going to drive our mission forward. We're really focused on allowing people with disabilities to contribute to society, participate in society, things like that. So our strategy helped kind of set the guardrails of what we will and won't do. It wasn't as specific as a roadmap because you don't want your innovation strategy to be very prescriptive.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so it's more like, here are the pillars we're going to focus on. Here are some guardrails of things that we probably shouldn't do. And then that just helped us to keep driving forward. And it also gives me more autonomy because when we have agreement on what the strategy is, it means, I have more freedom and flexibility to do things within that strategy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Can you talk to me a little bit, Kate, about what sort of business goals you're facing as the innovation leader within the org? Like what are the things that you are doing and how do they align to the business goals of the overall organization?
Yeah, we have a pretty mature goal setting process where we're setting quarterly goals. So we have company wide goals, and then every team, including the innovation team, has goals that will roll up to those company wide goals. And
Okay.
so innovation will often be doing things that roll up into broader company goals, but we're also one of the few teams that can go outside of the company goals because the company goals, are usually within a 1 year time frame or even shorter than that. And we want to really look ahead to the future and where should we go next. So even if the company as a whole is not working on one thing, we might start exploring something, and that might become a future company goal if our exploration works out.
Gotcha. Kate, who do you report into, if you don't mind my asking? And I'm just to give a little bit of context for the question, and I realize I'm prying a little. I'm asking because it sounds like you do have a lot of autonomy and a lot of trust. And, you're talking about how your future facing efforts come back around and impact sort of the future goals of the company. And so it sounds to me like you have buy in from senior leadership, both in terms of what you are allowed or enabled to do and in terms of, sort of your ability to then feed back into the company strategy moving forward.
Yeah, so I've reported to both of the co-founders at various times. So I've been with Fable for 5 years. I started off reporting to the CEO, and then I reported to the COO, and those are the two co-founders of Fable. So
Gotcha.
yeah, this is C-suite.
Okay. Awesome. And has it been a battle to sort of enable the type of autonomy that you're talking about, or was it born out of the strategic exercise that you've described?
I think with any role and, no matter who you are in a company, autonomy is a thing you earn over time, like
Yeah.
by earning trust and showing results, and communication is really one of the big keys toward getting the kind of autonomy. I feel like, sometimes leaders are in a bit of a vacuum where they're, working on their thing and they're not really communicating on progress and status and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I'd like to think it's partly just having earned trust over time that helps get that. But also, you know, there's earning trust with the senior leadership team, and then there's earning trust with the broader team too. And
Yes.
one of the challenges can be, so there's the people you refer up to, there's the people who are your peers, and then there's the people who are either report into you or are on other teams. So there's a lot to consider. And being a remote first company, uh, one of the things we try to do, and it is hard, is to just really over communicate. So you might have
Hmm.
with the C-suite or the leadership, but then you have to be careful that you also don't break trust with, employees.
Right. Of course.
Yeah.
On that note, Kate, you've mentioned your team a couple of times. Can you talk to me a little bit about the makeup of that team? How many people is it? What types of capabilities are part of the innovation team? And how do those different capabilities help move your efforts forward?
I mean, that's such a funny question because my team keeps changing. So when I started at Fable, I built up like managed services team. And so this was a team of user researchers who were delivering research on behalf of our customers. And that team now reports into another part of the organization. And then I built up another team around our instructional training content. And
Hmm.
so completely different roles, curriculum development and
Yeah.
other types of things. So I built that team, and then they moved out to another part of the organization. And so I have a tendency uh, to make new teams, to take people on and then move them around a lot. So my teams can be big at times, maybe not big the way a lot of people think of it big, because innovation is kind of lean, but big as in around maybe 8 to 10 people. And then sometimes
It's a
it's
good sized
smaller.
team.
Yeah, just like one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It fluctuates. It really depends on what we're working on, whether it's service oriented or not. And then I also tap into contractors a lot.
Okay.
So, like, I'll have a team and then I'll have a network of people who can assist with work as needed.
Got it. Interesting. Kate, that kind of brings two questions to mind that are sort of connected. One of the things that I like to sort of dig into with people is the idea of a culture of innovation. And a lot of the things that you've described around trust and autonomy, and you've already nodded at sort of how to work with the people around you based on the various levels within the organization. Talk to me a little bit about what a culture of innovation means to you all at Fable. And then within that, as I'm hearing that you have a tendency to kind of gather people to you and then re-release them back out into the company, I'm envisioning that perhaps, and perhaps you will prove me wrong, but that perhaps those people then come in and sort of, suck up the culture of innovation through osmosis and then have the opportunity to go out and help spread it around the organization. So I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
I think our innovation culture is really centered around inclusion too. That's something that really matters a lot at Fable. So not just our community of people with disabilities, but we also have a high number of employees with disabilities. So folks like
Sure.
myself, I think around 75% of our employees identify as having a disability.
Wow.
We're also the most inclusive company I've ever worked for. So like, I just have to throw that out there first. But innovation is really about moving fast sometimes and learning things. So you want to move fast, you want to have a goal in mind, and you also want to know when to abandon something, because you don't want to
Hmm.
be like going down a course of spending a lot of time and effort on something that's really not panning out. And so I think it's as much about, deciding what to start as it is as when to stop. And so we try to, focus on data collection. Sometimes that's quantitative data, sometimes more qualitative data. Like, what are the indicators that this is successful or not? And one
Hmm.
of the things I try to do, and I'm getting better and better at doing this, is setting out goals up front. Like, if
Yeah,
we're going to do this, what do we expect the outcome to be? And is it going to be time boxed? Are we going to limit our experimentation to a certain time frame, or not? And you got to have a little flexibility, because sometimes you'll
of course.
learn things along the way that might change your goals or change your time frame. But we try to bring just enough rigor
Mhm.
so that we're working with purpose.
Got it. You've mentioned a couple of things in there, Kate. You used the words both learning and experimentation, which of course, through the lens of innovation are so massively important, but they're things that a lot of companies, potentially people in similar seats, tend to lose track of because for better or worse these days, we've sort of gotten ourselves into this habit of I have an idea, let's create a roadmap, let's start moving down that roadmap. And you've talked a bit about goal setting and time boxing and things, but if we were to pull the slider kind of earlier in the process and think about how do you go about kind of gathering the ideas, determining which are worth testing, figuring out how long an idea should be given in order to kind of prove or disprove its value? Like, do you have a set process and framework for that, or is it more of a one-off decision based on whatever's in front of you?
We do have a bit of a framework, of like moving from lower fidelity to higher fidelity. So, like, a first phase might be more information gathering and like making a business case for something. And then, if you manage to make a good business case, you move on to another level of fidelity. So, we do,
Mhm.
it's pretty close to that learn, measure, build type of a loop.
Yeah.
Kind of a framework, sorry, where we're doing that. So we are trying to have certain things that you do at each stage of innovation almost consistently. Sometimes I will jump ahead and then jump back. Like, there's a little bit of flexibility there, but that's the kind of, loose structure that we have.
Got it. And do you source the ideas and the experiments that you're interested in from kind of across the organization, or is the innovation team primarily responsible for discovering opportunities and then determining whether or not you're going to kind of run at those?
A little bit of both. We get a lot of our ideas from our customers. So our customers, we listen very closely to what their problems and challenges are. We have a really strong customer success team. And then I also have some direct touch points with customers as well. So we're really listening to what they're finding hard about accessibility, and so that can lead to experiments. Sometimes it's, um, you know, strategic conversations about where we want to go in the future, and innovation can test the waters and see if this is something we actually want to get into or not. And then sometimes it's just, yeah, listening to other people across the organization who might um, have internal challenges or barriers, or um, even just listening to our community. So one of the
Mhm.
things I love is actually working directly with our community of testers. So I have, the privilege of being able to be both a leadership, but also do some individual contribution work. So I will get my hand dirty and go in there and work with the community directly. So I learn a lot from them as well. And diversity really is a driver of innovation. So,
Yeah.
having a diverse company, having a diverse customer base, and then having this diverse community of testers, there's a lot of ideas out there. You just kind of got to look and listen.
Yeah, I mean, part of what you're driving at, I think, is, you also have to be willing to take the time to stop and ask the right questions and listen to the responses and things
Yeah,
like
be
that, which it
curious,
sounds like you're
right?
Yes, yes, exactly. That's a
Mhm.
much better way to put it. Kate, do you have any favorite examples of projects or outcomes that you can share? And obviously, please, nothing that's proprietary, but I'm
Yeah.
curious to sort of understand what one or two things that have gone through that process and come out the other end might look like.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really proud of that I did very recently is so expanding our community of testers. Our traditional focus has been on people who use assistive technology. So that could be people who are blind who are using a screen reader, people who have low vision, they use screen magnification, or people with mobility limitations who are using all kinds of different software and hardware to navigate. And then we've had conviction that we wanted to include people with cognitive disabilities in our community for a long time, but our focus has been on those assistive technology users. So obviously not just me, but multiple people in the company working to build a pool of cognitive testers and experimenting with, how are our customers going to interact with people with cognitive disabilities? How is it going to be different than how they interact with assistive technology users? And what sorts of things are they going to learn from engaging with this new pool? And realizing that, there are accessibility issues that are very clear, and then there are ones that are really the spectrum of usability. So if you think of usability as, is something easy to use? Is it delightful? And it's kind of this spectrum. And there becomes a point where usability starts to become so poor that it starts to veer into accessibility issues. So
Yeah.
we're really starting to see the spectrum where our cognitive testers can identify usability issues, and then like some of the more extreme usability issues, which really start to become accessibility barriers. So really proud of bringing that. And that's something we've already done a beta release with a few of our customers, and we've been speaking about it publicly, and we're just getting ready and ramping up to release this to all of our customers very shortly. And that was just like a long process. We actually created a working group with some of our customers who had experience working with people with cognitive disabilities to really like tease out, how are we going to do this? What are the best practices?
Hmm.
So it's been a long and collaborative process, and I'm just really proud of where we ended up.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about assisted technology, Kate. You've nodded and gave a couple of examples of it, but can you give me kind of a broader view of what assisted technology encompasses, and then what are some of the unique aspects of designing either for or to be inclusive of assisted technologies that perhaps people don't think of if they're not in the user group?
Yeah. So assistive technology is really either a hardware or software layer that enables people with disability to interact in the digital world. So for me, I rely on hearing aids, which I
Hmm.
wear in both of my ears, but then I also rely on captions. So, not that long ago, it was really rare to find captions on videos or in meetings. And in the last, 4 or 5 years, they're really everywhere. So, I no longer have to worry about if the show I'm watching on TV or the movie I'm watching on TV has captions. It just does. Almost
That's great.
everything does. Even right now, I have captions running in my browser so that I can read what you're saying. Everyone uses captions nowadays, especially Gen Z, everyone on TikTok,
Yeah.
everything has captions. But really, for people who are hard of hearing, they are crucial, right?
Hmm.
Not just nice. We don't just like captions, we need captions. So, a lot of technologies that started off for accessibility are being adapted by the mainstream. And then we also see technologies that are meant for the mainstream being adopted by people with disabilities. So an example of that would
Interesting.
be the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. So
Yeah.
for everybody who wears Meta Ray-Bans because they have the built-in AI and they think that's really cool, for somebody who's blind, Meta Ray-Bans can help you read labels. Like you can pick up a can of soup and look at the label and know it's a can of soup and not a can of beans, right? Which is
Right.
a really different culinary experience. So it was really useful to have that. And, companies can take mainstream products and look at them with an accessibility lens and work with people with disabilities to take a mainstream product and make it usable for a wider audience of people. So that's one way to think about it. And then there are technologies like hearing aids, which are really specific to people with disabilities.
Hmm.
But then you start to see Apple AirPods introducing hearing features, right?
Right. Well, there's that, and it's interesting that you bring that up. So my mom, who is in her late 70s, recently got hearing aids, and for somebody who doesn't know much about them, you think, okay, they amplify sound so that you can hear it better. And perhaps this is in alignment with what you're describing. Hers connect to her phone like her Bluetooth, like a pair of Bluetooth headphones, and her phone rings and it's across the house, and she no longer has to worry. Like, it has changed so much about the way that she interacts with the technology that she's used to, that I would never have thought of prior to sort of seeing her experience with it. And so I think it is interesting to see how much more connected some of that technology is becoming, and where the overlap between my use of regular Bluetooth headphones and her use of Bluetooth enabled hearing aids kind of cross paths and begin to feel very similar in a way.
Yeah, it's starting to sort of come together, and almost every device has built-in assistive technology. So you wouldn't know it if you've never looked in the accessibility settings of your laptop or your smartphone, but they're there. So
Hmm.
you most likely have a screen reader built in. So if you wanted to just listen to everything on your computer instead of reading it, it's there. Live captions are available on almost all platforms if you need them. Magnification is there. Once you're over the age of 40, small print becomes hard to see. So you
I'm
might just
learning
stay
this.
with, yeah, increasing your font size, increasing the contrast, or if you have more significant vision loss, you might have to actually magnify things 200, 300, 400, even 800%. So,
Wow.
it's starting to be ubiquitous in that it's like built into all of our hardware already.
Hmm.
One of the challenging things is most people don't realize it's there. And so a lot of people don't identify as having a disability, but they would really benefit from some of these technologies and they just
Right.
don't know where to find them. So they don't think of themselves as needing accessibility. But, like if you've ever had fatigue from typing too much, you'd probably really want to switch over to voice dictation at some point,
Hmm.
depending on what you're doing. And, not knowing that that's built in or where to find it can be a bit of a challenge for some people. So there's a lot of people who could benefit from this stuff who are just not aware of it.
That's a really interesting point, Kate. And it makes me wonder if you had to rename the accessibility menu so that it was more inviting to more people who don't think of themselves as needing accessibility aids, what would you call it?
I don't know that I would actually change the menu, but I think, when you get a new device, we're used to product onboardings, right? Like having an
Right.
onboarding, like here are all the features that you could use. Here's something to explore if you want to, change the setup, of how things look, of how you interact with your computer. So I wouldn't necessarily, because you don't want to take away from people with disabilities who know to look for the accessibility settings.
No, and that's fair. It was almost more of a thought exercise around what would I call that if I didn't want to call it what I know to call it now.
Yeah, it's more just exposing it to a wider audience.
Sure. Sure. Interesting. A little bit of a change in direction here, Kate, but what are some things that folks without disabilities might not readily consider or think about when it comes to considering innovation for a community or an audience that has unique needs? Like, as an innovator, what should I sit down and think about differently the next time I go to start a project, regardless of whether that's an accessibility focused project or not?
Yeah, one of the things we like to talk about at Fable a lot is designing for the edges. So if you think
Hmm.
of population as, this average in the middle, and there really is no average, but people like to think about I'm designing for the average person.
Right.
And then you have your outliers or people on the edges of, what is statistically average. And they are the people who have more unique, distinct needs. And when you design for those people on the edges, you actually accommodate the needs of everybody in the middle anyway. So we like to encourage people to work with people who have the most extreme needs, understand those needs, and you just create more robust, more interesting products and solutions. So there's a lot of innovation to be had from just realizing how different people are in the world and how differently they interact with technology and products and services. Um,
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you're absolutely right. If you catch the edges, then you're going to hit the middle. I like the idea of instead of thinking of it as constraints, thinking of it as almost a way to not, that sounds terrible, tackle more people, to address a broader audience, I think might be a better way to say that, but you get my point.
yeah, like when you think about, I'll go back to that idea of cognitive accessibility. So
Oh,
cognitive
good. I was going to ask about
really,
that in a minute here.
really includes anyone who has challenges with memory, with focus, with learning. It could be specific diagnoses such as autism, or it might just be, you know, which falls under the umbrella of neurodiversity, or could be something like a traumatic brain injury. So these are the people with disabilities who really need accessibility. And so they will need things like maybe simplicity, less distractions, things like that. But then if you think about, seniors,
Hmm.
where they're starting to face cognitive decline and they may not think of it as disability, but if you want to capture, anyone over the age of 65, all the things you do for cognitive accessibility are going to be helpful to those people. we know with the younger generations, they're really focused on inclusion, the environment, and, you know, you didn't think it was just the use of pronouns and, just
Right.
a real feeling of inclusivity. So having an approach to accessibility can really have them have that brand loyalty because they will look for companies where inclusion could be a selling feature for them, even if they don't personally need it, that they just want companies to do good in the
Oh,
world.
yeah.
And then between the young people and the older people, we have, the middle where everyone's really busy and stressed out and like working too much. And they
Right.
also benefit from cognitive accessibility just because they're busy. I mean, how many times do you read an email and you don't read it fully and you reply and it's completely the wrong reply because you like missed one sentence that
Yeah.
gave all the context and then you're like, "Oh, sorry."
Yes. Let me pretend that I didn't, that I actually read that carefully.
Yeah, exactly. AI or even AI in the Meta Ray-Ban example where AI is being used in smart glasses to describe
Hmm.
things for people with disabilities, where, now people who are blind can see through the use of AI. So there's this real, push for more accessibility and inclusion brought about by AI. But then there's this flip side of it where AI really is based on the averages, that average.
Yes.
So when we start to run into things like statistical discrimination where people with disabilities are not one group. You can
Right.
put us in one category, but our disabilities are very different. So I have hearing loss, and somebody else, even with the same level of hearing loss, might not need the same thing. So somebody might use sign language to communicate, even though I don't. And so I want captions, and they want sign language
Right.
or we have the same disability. So when you try to apply algorithm to people with disabilities, they just don't work because we're
Hmm.
so different. And so you end up with patterns of discrimination if people aren't careful on how they're using AI to make decisions about humans, where people might be excluded from medical benefits or excluded from access to healthcare or insurance or jobs is a big one because so many AI resume screening tools will just filter out all the differences. So let's say somebody had a chronic illness and they were out of work for a little while, and an AI just sees a big gap in the work experience and it just like
Right.
discards that resume and decides it's not desirable because it's been trained to look for people who have a certain work history and a continuous work history. And that
Right.
person might be a really good candidate and they were sick for a year and they weren't working and they were just eliminated just like that. So there's, good in that. There's
Hmm.
opportunities for AI to improve things, but we have to be really careful how we use it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Have you seen anybody who is either using AI really well, or I guess more broadly, Kate, do you have favorite examples of brands, companies, products that you think do a really good job of being cognizant of the community that has unique needs?
I mean, a lot of the big brands do put a lot of emphasis on accessibility. So Microsoft has an inclusive tech lab
Hmm.
and developed the Xbox accessible controller. So for folks who like to game, I'm not one of them, but you have these little handheld thingies, and you're expected to be able to hold them and press all these buttons really
Right.
rapidly. And for a lot of people, that is just not a feasible way of interacting with the game. So they worked with people with disabilities to develop a controller that was very adaptable. And so you can connect all the different devices to it. You can use it in many different ways. You can even have two players where one person's using the controller and a second person is helping them out with certain things.
Huh.
And yeah, so there are a lot of companies that have this focus on accessibility. Microsoft is one of them. Apple, they have these great ads sometimes about accessibility. So they're not just doing accessibility, but they're telling people that they're doing it. I don't think it's available online anymore, but there was this great ad called The Greatest, and it was just about the day in the life of people with disabilities interacting with their Apple devices. It's
Interesting.
really cool just to see people interacting with their iPhones in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there was a TV show. I can't I can't remember the name, but the main character was blind in the TV show, and watching the show, which was very enjoyable, and seeing how she interacted with her mobile device was interesting and sort of eye-opening for somebody, again, who hasn't kind of explored that particular need. So, Kate, I'm interested in learning a little bit more about how you view the alignment of business needs with accessibility needs. And to give a little bit of context there, you've mentioned a couple of times, the idea of driving brand awareness and brand loyalty for companies that are focused on providing accessible features for smaller, younger, less mature companies that are perhaps still just trying to sort of find product market fit or get something out into the world that works. Where do you sort of advise the line in terms of balancing the cost of experimenting and ensuring an accessible product with kind of the go business needs of an early stage startup, for example, that is trying to make a mark and find a place?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the reasons why sometimes companies can be slow and hesitate on accessibility is because they just don't have the knowledge of
Hmm.
it. So, if you're hiring, even if you only have one engineer, if that one engineer knows accessibility, you're, that much farther ahead. One of my big pet peeves is I used to work for government for nearly 20 years, actually, before I
Wow.
was in innovation. Yeah, it's quite the change. Um, Very different ways of working, and for good reason. Government
Sure.
needs to be stable. They don't want to, have services just
Yours is.
going, not available. They don't want to experiment with service delivery. People need driver's licenses and
Hmm.
access to teachers and hospitals and things like that. So it's different for purpose. But and where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought. Just like you. It'll come back to me.
I was asking about sort of the balancing of business needs, especially for early stage companies against accessibility
Right,
needs.
right. So where I was going with that is I think governments have encouraged accessibility through laws, whether that's in Canada or the US or even in Europe. But one of the big gaps is you can have a law that says websites and apps need to be accessible, but if you don't have the skill sets in the market, it's
Hmm.
really hard to comply with that. So I really think one of the missed opportunities was embedding accessibility into curriculum and mandating it as part of education because you know if you go to school and learn computer programming and you don't learn accessible computer programming, you have to
Right.
relearn.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why it's hard. And if, everybody who had an education included accessibility in that education, it would be that much easier for startups. So I would say the one thing would be if you're hiring is just asking that question about, do you know anything about accessibility and trying to like have a bias towards people who have some accessibility knowledge. And, it's not that hard to learn. But
Sure.
it's somebody professional development if they wanna spend some time. Time spent learning something is better than no time spent learning something.
Of course.
A lot of people think they've gotta be perfect at something in order to do it, and really, you just have to start. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know everything.
Oh
So,
man.
you
I
know
mean, that goes for innovation and life and
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah. So, even if a company is just like, "We're gonna choose a really accessible font that's easy to read." I'm like, "Good. That's a good starting point. Let's start
Right.
with that."
Right. Awesome. Kate, this has been super interesting. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think would sort of tie a bow around our conversation or that I've just been neglectful in not covering here?
I guess I would just say, like, I sort of alluded to this at the start that people with disabilities are great innovators because they have to be, right?
Mm,
Like, when you can't interact with the world and the world's not designed for you, yes, you have assistive technologies and we do have accessibility, but there's still a lot of barriers you run into, and you've got to figure out how to work around that. So
yeah.
I think companies sometimes see potential employees and new hires who have a disability as difficult. And I think I'd really like people to think about that as it's actually not that difficult and you're missing out if you're just worried about what do I have to do to help this employee to work. And you're not
Right.
thinking about what can this employee contribute to my workforce because they have such a different perspective. So
Right. And I mean, you nodded to this earlier as well, but the diversity of perspective in terms of, here's a person who presumably interacts with the world in a way that is different from, you know, the norm. And again, the
yeah,
norm is a big blurry spot, but, leveraging uniqueness of that perspective is an opportunity. And you're right. I
Yeah.
think a lot of folks miss it.
Companies want to innovate, and here you have very innovative people. So
Right.
they need to make that connection more and not be afraid. Like, don't be afraid to talk about disability or to hire people with disabilities or ask them what they need. That's the other thing that stops a lot of companies. They're just like, this is unfamiliar to me. And so I'm afraid of it and
Yes.
should not be afraid of it. We're very friendly people for the most part.
That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. Join us again for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe at innovatedisruptordie.com. That's all, folks.